Friends, I'd like to invite you to stand now in honor of the reading of the gospel. This morning we're going to be reading from the Gospel of Matthew, beginning at the 9th chapter of Matthew, beginning at the 9th verse. So as Jesus was walking along, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And Matthew got up and he followed Jesus. And as he sat at dinner in the house, many tax collectors and sinners came, and they were sitting with him and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when Jesus heard this, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. So go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have come to call not the righteous, but sinners." This is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. So here's the situation as we find it. Jesus is in Capernaum. Again, Capernaum is in Galilee, and this was kind of like his home base for his Galilean ministry. And so we find him in our scripture lesson walking about town one day. And as he's walking through Capernaum, he comes to the tax booth. And sitting at the tax booth was a man named Matthew. And in this moment, Jesus saw Matthew, and he issues a call. "Follow me," he says. And immediately Matthew got up and went with Jesus. So this is interesting because last week we began this series, Unexpected Callings. And we began by looking at the calling of the first disciples. You remember that Jesus at that point in time was walking along the Sea of Galilee, and as he was going along, he saw on two separate occasions, he saw sets of brothers. In the first place, there was Peter and Andrew, and then there was also James and John. And he calls out to both of these sets of brothers, "Follow me." And each instance, the brothers went with Jesus. And so this morning we come to another calling, the calling of Matthew, and it sounds pretty much the same. Jesus comes to a man, sees him, calls to him, "Follow me," and the man leaves what he is doing and he follows Jesus. So the question that I have for us to consider today is, how are these two callings different? And beyond finding out their difference, I have a more personal question of how does this particular calling of Matthew, how does his story, the story of his calling, how does it work to push us past the place of purpose to the place of passion? How does this story inspire us to discover the passion that we can know when we travel along the way of Christ? All right, so last week, as we were having that conversation about the calling of the first disciples, we made it about us as well. We wanted to bring something out of the text that applied to our lives. And we realized that in their story, what speaks to us is that we also are called. And when we are called by Jesus to follow him, we're actually receiving an invitation. And that the invitation that we receive is an invitation to participate in the continued ministry of Jesus Christ. Now, Jesus had a pretty clear focus. He had a vision for his ministry, and he had a mission by which he went about to achieve his vision. That was to restore life to others. And that included the lost, the broken, and the denied. And so when we are invited to participate in the continued ministry of Jesus, we get to share that vision and we get to adopt that mission. And because we share the vision, because we adopt the mission, because we strive to work out what Jesus has done, we too discover that there is purpose for us as well. There is purpose for us to be found in the mission and ministry of Jesus Christ. But my curiosity is, what's the difference between purpose and passion? It's one thing to have purpose, but it's a completely other thing to have passion in your life. Now, don't get me wrong. I know that there are plenty of people who are struggling with that sense of purpose. I know that there are people here last week who heard that message and thought, yes, this is relevant to me. It's relevant for me to hear that there is this sense of struggling with purpose and this sense of participating and the feeling of not belonging because I don't know what my purpose is. And I think that's true for a lot of people. In fact, I got an email just yesterday from a member of our church. And that's exactly what they put in this email that they sent to me, was this struggle with purpose that they're going through. I know that it's real for a lot of people. But while it's real for a lot of people, I think it's equally true of a whole other group of people, that it's not so much about feeling a need for purpose, it's about feeling a need for passion. I imagine that last week that there were some of you who were here who thought, I'll be honest with you, Ross, I got plenty of purpose. I have plenty of things that occupy my time, that occupy my attention. There are responsibilities that I have to do. There are jobs that I have to get done. There are people who rely on me. There are plenty of meaningful preoccupations that fill my day. I'm not without purpose. What I'm lacking is passion in my life. Does that speak true of anyone? Does it speak true of you, or of being able to say, it's not so much that I need purpose, I need something inspiring me? That's what I think some of us might actually be struggling with. A sense of a life lived with inspiration. I don't know why, but Elon Musk comes to mind. I know nothing about Elon Musk. I'll be honest with you, I know nothing about him. I know that he was the Tesla guy, and he's now trying to build a space shuttle that takes people into space. That's about all I know with him, but I realize that if that's the kind of things he's doing, he must be living a pretty inspired life. I don't think you wake up in the morning and go like, oh, it's Monday, oh, I gotta go build a space shuttle, like. I feel like when he wakes up in the morning, it's gotta be like, I am going to push against boundaries today. I am going to go against conventional thinking. I'm going to do things that cannot be done. And I think that comes from a place of inspiration. And here's the good news that I want to share with you all today. I believe that when you share the purpose of Jesus and follow the way of Jesus, you are also going to be invited to share the passion of Jesus too. That's what I think the good news is for us today. So here's the thing that we have to differentiate. What's the difference between the calling of the disciples and the calling of Matthew? And it's a subtle difference, but one that has a pretty profound impact. And it's found in the words, follow me. In both instances, the men are invited by Jesus to follow me. But they're different words. See, when Jesus is walking along the Sea of Galilee and sees the brothers, he calls out and says, follow me. And he uses a specific word that puts an emphasis on placement. It means to come behind or to stand behind, to come after. So he's focusing in on positioning. He's saying, take this place behind me. Now, what's cool about that is undoubtedly these men follow Jesus. They take his word, they come to him, they fall behind him, and because they've assumed this position, it enables them to learn from Jesus, to work with Jesus, to grow with Jesus. All the things that are available to a disciple, they get access to because they are behind Jesus. And because they are behind Jesus, they receive this invitation to participate. And as they participate, that's where they discover this new purpose that Jesus has for them. But then we see something different when Jesus calls Matthew. he uses a different word. Still translates follow me, but instead of being a word that emphasizes position, it emphasizes direction. It's a word that means more along the lines of like, come alongside of me, or come with me. It's more about flow. And that's really what we think of when we think of the word follow. It's not so much about standing or taking a position, it's about assuming a direction. So Jesus has approached this man, Matthew, and he invites him not to just come and take a position behind me, it's come and go with me. Come and choose my way. And I think that's a pretty profound distinction to make, because in the same way that the other disciples are going to learn from Jesus, work with Jesus, live with Jesus, grow with Jesus, Matthew will get to do the same thing. He's receiving the same invitation to participate. And as he participates in this life with Jesus, he is going to learn his new purpose. But it's a purpose that is found when he goes in this new direction, when he chooses this new way. Now, why does that matter for Matthew? What makes it interesting is who Matthew was. You see, he would go with Jesus and he would choose this new way, but it's in the midst of choosing this new way that he's also going to come across the fact that he doesn't just obtain a new purpose. He's being invited to share the same passion that Jesus has. So Matthew is a tax collector. That's what we know of him. Jesus finds him sitting in a tax booth. And the whole taxation system, the Roman taxation system, was a pretty complex thing. I'm not going to break that down. Here's what you need to know. People who collect taxes were not well liked. Does that make sense? I mean, can we, does that seem too far-fetched that they wouldn't be liked? Of course not. They would not be liked. Here's what makes it worse. The Romans would hire out someone to collect the taxes in that area. That would be one person whose job it was to collect it. And they would go out and get like bounty hunters, if you will. So they would hire Jewish men to go around and collect the taxes from their own people and then bring them together to give to the Romans. That's what a tax collector was. So you can imagine the degree to which they were despised by their own. Because it was kind of like being traitors. They were going around and they were taking money from their own people to give to another empire. I mean, imagine if Canada came down and took control of us. And then it would be my job to go to each of you and to collect your taxes to pay back to Canada. How well would y'all like me? Of course not. Canada. So, never happened. Anyway. But you get the point. This is Matthew. Matthew is a Jewish man who's making a life of himself by taking money from his own people and giving that money to the Romans. That in and of itself makes him despised, but it's not just the fact that he's despised by his people. It's also the fact that the work that he does has him interacting with goods that probably would not have met the ritual purifications according to the law. And so there was a stigma applied to these tax collectors as well. So they weren't just despised, there was a stigma that they were unclean. So we're not just talking about a man who is simply lost or broken. We're talking about someone who has been denied. He is among the denied of society. They have outcast him and put him as completely said, you are so incredibly unworthy and undesirable. That's who Matthew is. And Jesus comes to this man who was despised, this man who would have been seen as unclean, and Jesus looks to him and he says, don't just come stand behind me. Choose my way. How good would that sound to some of you? I mean, how appealing does that sound? Find yourselves, do you ever just find yourselves like you're chugging along in life and you're just doing one thing after the next? You have plenty of purpose. You know it's there. Responsibility, check. Jobs, check. Deadlines, check. Children, check. You go down the list. You wake up in the morning, the first thing you have is a checklist of the things that you're supposed to do. And you know that if you don't do them, something else will fail. There is purpose to who you are. But is there passion to it? Imagine then this man Matthew just sitting at a tax booth with plenty to do, yet so unfulfilled. And having this moment where Jesus comes up to him and says, "Hey Matthew, I realize you tried it your way. How about choosing my way now? How about come with me and try the way that I can provide?" That puts things a little bit differently. And I think honestly for a lot of us, man, that would be good. You see, this is the person that Jesus reaches out to. This undesirable. This is the one that he offers an invitation to. Why? Why would Jesus offer him this opportunity? I think the answer is pretty simple. Jesus is not passionate about merit. Jesus is passionate about mercy. And Jesus sees in this man, Matthew, who the world has put to the edges of society, called the despised, called the unclean, and Jesus sees, here's one in need of God's grace. That's what Jesus is passionate about. And for that reason, he extends the opportunity. He extends the invitation. Come, follow me, participate in my life, participate in my ministry, share my vision, adopt my mission. Know my way and know my purpose, and you too will come to discover my passion. I want us to think one last thing before we finish up, though. How then do you move from a place of new purpose to being inspired to a place of new passion? How does that happen? How do you get from purpose to passion? And how do we discover that passion in the way of Christ? Well, after Jesus calls Matthew, what do? I love it. They go eat. Man, that's why I can handle being a Christian. It's like, let's do something good. Okay, let's go eat. That's what they do, though. He calls them, he follows, and they immediately go and they share in a meal together. The only thing is that Jesus doesn't just share this meal with Matthew. There are others who are at that table too. Other tax collectors and sinners. See, here's the reality is that Matthew was not an exception. Jesus did not make an exception for Matthew. Rather, Matthew is the model for Jesus. Matthew is the prototype of who Jesus holds passion for, who Jesus is passionate about. So Jesus invites one of these undesirables to the table, but in reality, there's a whole other group who's there with him. It's not just this one undesirable that he's invited to choose his way or to share his vision or to adopt his mission. No, by sitting at the table with these other men, he's further affirming exactly what we've come to realize is true, that his real concern is about these undesirables. And that's why when the Pharisees come up and they ask the question of, what is your teacher doing? Jesus is able to stand up and say, don't you realize? I have come to call not the righteous, but sinners. You see, Jesus felt passionately about these people, those whom we would consider broken, those whom we would consider despisable. He cares about their spiritual health. He had a purposeful ministry. A ministry of seeking to restore life to people like these people who are lost or weak or frail. But here's what we need to recognize about his ministry. His ministry was purposeful because it was inspired. Ministry was inspired by the love of God for those who do not deserve God's grace or God's mercy. Friends, that's all of us. There is not a single person here today who by their own merit deserves the grace of God or the mercy that Jesus could offer. And yet each of us has been given the invitation to follow, to know his purpose, and to know his passion. See, friends, we have been invited to participate in this continued ministry of Jesus Christ. And by sharing in his vision and by adopting his mission, we discover a new purpose in Jesus Christ. But we must realize that when we accept this call, we are choosing to follow a new way, and it is a way that moves with Jesus. And here's the thing, Jesus doesn't stand still. He's ever moving. There's no stagnation with him. And we're invited to move with Jesus, but when Jesus moves, it's passion-driven. You see, the way of Jesus seeks to restore life to all people, and that includes the lost and the broken, the denied. That includes people like you and me. But in Jesus, we gain a new passion. And we gain this passion when we choose his new way. And it will be this passion that will drive us to push past boundaries and conventional thinking so that we might live and labor passionately for the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so as I leave you today, I leave you with this one last thought, this challenge. How is God calling you? And more importantly, how is God calling New Beginnings to challenge boundaries and to challenge conventional thinking so that together we can live and labor in an inspired way that makes known the good news of Jesus Christ. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.